there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking, and great to have you along for another episode of Classic Fights. And we've got a ripper one. It's probably not as a classic fight as such; it's a classic series. But either way, just a very, very, very memorable set of fights. I'm going to bring in my co-host for this episode. It is Australia's walking boxing encyclopedia, Mike Altamura. How are you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm great. Pleasure to be here. And this is a great series of fights to discuss. It's interesting. Actually, one of the participants and we'll know once it's announced, but I was in his camp coming off of the last bout, and there was concerns from worldwide media of how he would bounce back, but he went on to have an absolutely legendary run thereafter. But I think that, when you think of these two fighters, you automatically think of the other. When you assess their careers, you automatically think of the other, and think that the way things panned out, it was a kind of a fair conclusion to what was an enterprising series.
Oh, it certainly was, mate. And you're right about the two being intertwined, because it's a bit like, Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward and Ali Fraser and countless others. But, of course, the fights we're talking about, the series, is this one. Manny Pacquiao, Juan Manuel Marquez. And you can see they had 4 fights over the course of 8.5 years. It started at featherweight and ended at welterweight, if you can believe that. And, it was an unbelievable one. I obviously got the first fight up there, Mike. But, it's an interesting one, because at the time, you can see there, the best against the best was the quote from USA Today. And certainly was, because they were both at the peak of the powers, weren't they? They were just beginning that long run of success both of them had.
The interesting part is both guys in between each fight had various stages of their careers where they were particularly flat. I remember leading into the third bout, so I'm not going to spoil the outcomes yet, but leading into the third bout, a lot of people within the media thought Pacquiao may annihilate Marquez that time around. They felt like he had grown into the weights, like you said, eventually winds up at welterweight. People felt Pacquiao had grown into the weight considerably better than Marquez, whereas Marquez was just essentially bulking in size to take on the biggest challenges in the world. But, what always kind of worked to Marquez's advantage was, I think their styles were just made, like I said, to intertwine and mesh with each other extremely well. Pacquiao, aggressive, stalking power puncher, a little bit, could have, some defensive lapses sometimes, a little bit reckless. And Marquez was just such a precise counterpuncher. So I think no matter what kind of the matchup was for Pacquiao with others, think that when it come to Marquez, it was always a difficult style for him to figure out.
It was, wasn't it? I'm actually going to start the footage going now, because we've obviously got 4 fights to get through. So we'll just start the highlights as we're talking there as it starts to roll. But you're right, I watched all 4 fights again, a lot of them highlights, because it's pretty hard to get through four fights these days with finding the time. But one thing, you're right, Pacquiao had that reckless style in all 4 fights. It was like he was just so anxious to get his hands on Marquez and see the first of 3 knockdowns in this round. But Marquez just had that style that just offset Pacquiao, didn't he? He counter-punched, beautiful punches, and both landed some awesome shots. But he just had that style that he always troubled Pacquiao, didn't he? In all 4 fights.
There's a reason why Marquez was never stopped throughout a near 20-year plus career, and it's because of how defensively sound he was. Especially when he got hurt and when he got tagged, he knew how to step off and hold and survive and use his feet. Such a clever counterpuncher. And this is probably the closest he ever come to being stopped. Down 3 times in that round. A lot of referees would wave it off.
Definitely, yeah.
No 3 knockdown rule. 10-6 round, and then, against the odds, comes back like a freight train.
And look at that one there too, mate. He actually hit him while he was on the ground, so he was lucky he actually didn't get one of those points back, because it was blatantly a left to the head while he was on the ground. But you're right. I'm assuming, obviously, there was no 3 knockdown rule in effect, but you're right. Any other referee might have actually stopped that right there and then.
Yeah, exactly. Even though, like, Marquez was relatively fresh off of each of the knockdowns, they weren't flash knockdowns. They were a little bit more impactful than flash knockdowns, but his legs were firmly under him, surprisingly so. And you see here, he's starting to work his way back into the rhythm of the fight. For my money, I always felt this was the best of their 4-bout series.
Yeah, I agree.
Always felt like this was the best 2-way action. It's probably the one that you can look at and have the most contention and have different arguments as to who in particular was a winner. Whereas a couple of the others maybe didn't go the way people anticipated, but you can kind of make arguments, like we'll get there as we work through it. But
Yeah.
this fight, I spoke to people that had the scores in all different kind of places, depending on how you perceived a lot of the early rounds.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we didn't actually mention at the start, but it took place on May 8th, 2004 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, of course, with the WBA, IBF featherweight titles. Pacquiao was 38-2-1 going into the fight. Marquez was 42-2. But yeah, I'm with you, Mike. It's I scored it. This is probably the one fight that's probably more recent than mine. I only watched it probably about a month or so ago, and it was an interesting one because Pacquiao obviously straight out the blocks, but apart from that, I thought Juan Manuel Marquez pretty much dominated the rest of the fight. Of course, he had a lot of ground he had to make up, but I thought Pacquiao probably came back a little bit more in the later rounds, but I thought those middle rounds were all Marquez. What did you think?
Yeah, from memory on first watching, I had Marquez by a couple points. And every time I've gone back and rewatched it, I've struggled to peg it back any further than that. I think you can... It's hard, like you said, because he's overcoming that early deficit, but the closest they ever got was 8-4. So even with an 8-4 structure, Marquez comes out the winner by 1 point. But otherwise, generally speaking, like 8-4, 9-5, 9-3, sorry, is the way I kind of perceive it. But there was a few tight rounds, and you can see that if they shaded Pacquiao's way, that's how they come to the conclusion of what the bout was.
Yeah, well, the official judges were, again, they're all over the place as well, because I think it was 115-110 to Pacquiao, 115-110 to Marquez. So that's pretty much giving Marquez 10 of the 12 rounds, which is quite amazing. The other judge had it 7 rounds to 5, but of course the knockdowns thrown in there. I don't want to obviously spoil it, but I'm assuming everyone that's is watching now knows the result, so we're going to let it go. But then the other judge had it 113-113. Now, the conjecture about that is that he only, by the sounds of things, only gave Pacquiao the first round 10-7 in 10-6, which ultimately cost Pacquiao the fight.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where scoring's such a subjective thing. There's nothing that denotes that you need to score around a particular way when there's 1, 2, or 3 knockdowns within the round. Although the general rule of thumb is someone gets knocked down 3 times in a round, it's 10-6 if they somehow survive. So, yeah, that was a trigger point. But the thing is, it would have been maybe a little bit of injustice had he actually scored it accordingly, because that would have shaded a split decision in Pacquiao's favor, which, like I said, there was talk at the time where people felt like Marquez had to peg back too big a lead. But on rewatching the fight a number of times, like I said, I've just never adjusted from the fact that I think Marquez really did control the action after the first couple rounds.
He did, and as I said at the start, he just had that style that he just... Maybe Morales was a little bit the same too, just had that style that could unsettle Pacquiao, because more so, I mean, Pacquiao was known as I suppose, a reckless fighter, and it was to his benefit, and people loved him, the excitement, but in these 4 fights, he actually probably the most reckless that I've probably seen him in any of the fights. Now, I'm not sure whether he wanted to get his hands on Marquez enough, or he was just frustrated by the style that Marquez brought to the table. What were your thoughts?
I think Marquez's dimensions made a big difference. I think Marquez being a little bit shorter, similar height to Pacquiao, being able to bob and weave and miss and counter him in between. Pacquiao always excelled against the tall, rangy guys that were there as hittable targets. When you think of, even like Cotto was a little bigger, easier to hit, a bit more slow, not the fastest feet. You look at who else? I mean, obviously Mayweather, different story because of the footwork.
Didn't end well for
but,
him.
Hatton right there in the pocket. Margarito, tall statue right there to be hit. David Diaz, you couldn't miss him if you tried. Like those flat-footed guys served him, but someone short, Scotland Marquez, who could bob, weave, move in and out. Like I said, it was a style that was made. Pacquiao's style was made for Marquez because he could draw him onto punches. And Marquez's best offensive attacks come off of naturally countering, where Marquez had to go and chase the fight, like against Orlando Salido, like against Chris John. There's a number of those fights. He wasn't at his best in those bouts. Whereas guys like Diaz, when he fought Diaz, when he fought Michael Katsidis, they played right into Marquez's wheelhouse of countering you. And if you walk onto his shots, you're going to get lit up all night.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was the first fight. So fight one to Manny Pacquiao. So that was May 8th, 2004. Fight two, what took place on March 15th, 2008 at the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas this time for the WBC Super Featherweight title. So just looking at the records in between fights, Marquez had wins over Narongrat Parang for the IBF World Featherweight title. He'd lost. This is Manny Pacquiao, I'm sorry. Then he had the loss to Eric Morales at the MGM Grand. He rebounded over Hector Velasquez with a 6th-round knockout. Had the return fight with Morales, won by 10th round knockout. Oscar Larios, I know you could read all this off your top of your head, mate, but I'm reading it off online here. Eric Morales, Oscar Larios, another win over Eric Morales to really put that exclamation point on that series. I think that was a 3rd round knockout. That was for the WBC Super Feather title. He then beat Jorge Solis for the world. That was for the international Super Featherweight title. Barrera, of course, he won a 12-round decision. And then, of course, for Marquez. Marquez, on the other hand, fought Orlando Salido for a 12-round decision. Victor Polo for a 12-round decision. Chris John, he actually lost a 12-round decision, of course. Managed, of course, by Tony Tolge over there. And who was the other manager in Thailand, Mike?
Craig Christian.
Yep.
Craig Christian. Yeah.
And I think he was actually the WBA Fighter of the Decade. Is that right, Chris John?
Yeah, well, he made enough defenses of that WBA strap to earn that right. Yeah.
So he'd also had a 7th-round knockout of Turdzak Jandalong. Jim Rex Jaka had a 12-round decision over Marco Antonio Barrera, a 12-round decision over Rocky Juarez. So going into this fight again with Manny. So let's get the video rolling there, which I probably should have done in the first place. But as I said, March 15th, 2008. And look, I don't know about you, apart from the knockdowns in the first round, it was almost just round 13 onwards, wasn't it? So here we go again.
Yeah, although to me, and I'll get to what my general thought was, I thought this was probably their least controversial fight of the series. I know some people might contest me on that, but I thought the winner of this bout was deserved, and it was a relatively clear outcome. It was a tight fight, but I don't think there was an argument as to who the victor was at the conclusion of the 12 rounds here. But yeah, like you said, they picked up where they left off. I think in between fights, Pacquiao made some adjustments with Roach. I think he really, from the first bout to this, had developed the right jab quite a bit, and also his right hook.
Yeah, he had, and we didn't actually mention that because he'd obviously had, he'd had world title fights in the Philippines, but when he got to the States and hooked up with Freddie Roach, it was just a match made in heaven, wasn't it? One thing I actually wanted to mention, Mike, in all these 4 fights, correct me if I'm wrong, but Marquez was probably one of the only fighters I saw that visibly hurt Pacquiao. I'm just trying to think some others, but really actually wobbled him or obviously knocked him down. You didn't really see a lot of other fighters do that to Manny over the journey, did you?
No, they might have bothered him a little bit, or you could see even Margarito lost every round, but Margarito hurt Pacquiao to the body.
Did. Yeah.
You were able to see that. Larios scored a flash knockdown. Skinny Hussein, of course, early career, had him down and just about out from a left jab. But generally speaking, Pacquiao had a pretty good poker face. But with Marquez, you seen he got shifted. And I just think it was the precision and the speed of Marquez's shots. Like I was saying, the trajectory, Pacquiao found him difficult to read, especially at close quarters.
He did. I think one thing that you take note in watching all these fights, of course, is just the timing of Marquez. Like, he's not the fastest guy in the world. He's probably not the biggest puncher, although the 4th fight we obviously saw a little bit different. But it's just that timing. And even in that 4th fight, of course, we'll get to that in a sec, it was more so the timing of the punch rather than the power of the punch. And you can see just in these punches there, and that punch was almost a prelude to what happened in the 4th fight. But he just had that timing. He always had Manny's measure, and as I said, he was probably the only one that really could do that to Manny, apart from maybe Morales and of course Mayweather, of course. But you can see here, as much success as Manny is having, Marquez is certainly having his moments as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing I'm just seeing, revisiting these highlights is just how much you have to appreciate the feet of these guys. Look how activated their feet are throughout the rounds here, and constantly shifting, constantly fighting for battle of the outside position, getting the other guy inside their guard. And, the conditioning of both fighters is just otherworldly.
Oh, it is, and that's probably the one thing with both of these guys, the pace. I mean, Manny always fought at an unbelievable pace, but again, Juan Manuel Marquez, I'll spit that out. Juan Manuel Marquez, again, one of the only fighters that could actually go with him, because you saw Manny in fights against I'll probably use an example of someone like a Miguel Cotto, who was a great fighter, but just couldn't go with Manny as far as pace goes. And then, of course, fighters like Margarita and just countless of others, the pace he sets and the punches he throws. Again, as I said, Marquez is one of the only few that could go with him.
Yeah, the speed and angles overwhelm him, whereas Marquez kind of welcomed that because, like I said, he's naturally waiting for his opportunity to counter and time you. And Pacquiao's a guy that, because he was so offensive-minded, he's handing you those opportunities all night, but you need to be punch perfect because one half inch off or one slight second reaction time off, and you could be staring at the lights with Pacquiao.
Yeah, exactly. So in round 9 here, I remember thinking that Manny had done more than enough at this stage, but I remember looking at the judge, Harold Letterman, I think it was the analyst on there, and I think he might have had it even. Oh no, he had Pacquiao ahead by 2 points after 9 rounds. So at this stage, again, Manny Pacquiao was just his DNA, where he doesn't know how to actually take a round off or take a step back. It was just like, we've got to win every second of every round, wasn't he? And that's what we loved about him.
Yeah, I mean, Freddie Roach used to always say about Manny that you couldn't temper him to go out there and cruise and take a round off. If he took a round off, it just was something that kind of naturally happened within the context of the fight. But if you instructed him to do that, he wouldn't really know how to fight to that plan. It was just an all-offensive salvo, which it's impressive that Pacquiao has been able to last at an elite level into his 40s, given the kind of style that he brought. Really from early career, but really from the moment he was matched in the super fights, from Marco Antonio Barrera onwards, every fight he brought the same kind of dynamic, which was just frenetic energy.
Yeah, no, he did. And again, as in the first fights, a knockdown would ultimately prove decisive, obviously in the 12th round here. But the final scorecards were Pacquiao 115, 112. The other judge had Marquez 115, 112, and the other third judge had it 114, 113 to Pacquiao. So again, without that knockdown, we would have had a draw.
Yeah, I thought Pacquiao won quite clearly this bout. I had a 115, 112, but I thought that there wasn't a lot of swing rounds in making that assessment. So I was happy that at least that was a race. But of course, not Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez's trainer, Nacho Beristan, beat the drum the loudest, that it was a poor decision, that they needed to run it back. And, the one thing we know about sports, especially in that era, there was such a strong rivalry between the Filipino fighters and the Mexican fighters.
Yeah.
And, the Mexicans backed their own like nobody else. So there was always going to be the demand to run the fight back in future. And for Marquez, it almost felt like a legacy unfulfilled, that he wasn't able to get that victory over Pacquiao. I think he'd had other losses in his career. Of course, famously got disqualified on debut for knocking out an opponent when he was down. He had a close decision loss to Freddie Norwood, that what you'd got to consider a controversial decision loss to Chris John in Indonesia. But those defeats never seemed to bother him. 12-round decision loss to Mayweather, it took it right on the chin.
Yeah.
The losses to Pacquiao just seemed to haunt him.
I did, and I remember, was it before the third fight, which we'll just get on to now, where he had the T-shirt saying, "I beat Manny Pacquiao twice." He really wanted that third fight, and Pacquiao took the bait, because here we are again, November 12th, 2011, so 3 years in between there. So this one took place, as I said, November 12th, 2011, again at the MGM Grand for the WBO welterweight title this time. So in between these fights, or the second and third fight, Manny was on an absolute tear. He'd beaten David Diaz, Oscar De La Hoya, Ricky Hatton. I was actually at that fight. Miguel Cotto, Joshua Clottey, Antonio Margarito, Shane Mosley. So that was an unbelievable stretch of fights for Manny, whereas Marquez had the win over Casamayor, won Diaz. He'd lost, obviously, to Floyd Mayweather Jr. Another win over Juan Diaz. The war with Katsidas, which I think was a really underrated performance by Michael. Thought he did unbelievably well. And
Absolutely.
then the win over, just a standard win over Lica Ramos. So before this fight, so we'll get into this one as well. Now, I must admit, Mike, this was the one where I didn't agree with the end result. I just thought that in this fight, I thought Marquez fought the more calm, I suppose, if that makes sense, for the fight. Manny always brings what Manny brings, but I thought in this fight, this is probably the best overall, even though we had the fourth fight, of course. This is probably the best I saw Juan Manuel Marquez fight.
It's incredible watching highlights of the first two bouts and then seeing the adjustment to them at welterweight. And actually, it reminds you just how unnatural both of them are at this particular weight. Look how thick their bodies are.
Well, the weights... Sorry, I was just going to say, the weight for it was 142 for Marquez, 143 for Manny. So they're obviously either lightweights / junior welterweights. They weren't welterweights.
Really, they were both the junior lightweights, but to chase the biggest challenges and legacy, they both kept moving up in weight. So I think the side note to this is that Marquez's only real bout prior at welterweight was against Floyd Mayweather. And he looked kind of slow and sluggish in that bout and losing pretty much every round. And a lot of people just felt like Pacquiao had filled out better, shifting up in weight. It's gone all the way up to 154, where, like we said, he crushed Margarito. He beat Clotty, who was a big, strong welterweight. He was taking out anyone and everyone. Sugar Shane Mosley, another legendary fighter. So the thought, the general consensus coming into this bout was that Pacquiao was finally shifting Marquez up to a weight where he was more comfortable and he was going to be able to potentially march through him. And it just didn't play out anything like that, which is, as I say, why they got to fight the fights.
Well, I mean, after the Mayweather fight, like you said, at welterweight, where he fought at 142, he actually went down to 133 for the fight with Juan Diaz. And then he bulked up again slightly for Katsitas, 134, 138 for Ramos. So, I mean, this is a guy that really should have been fighting at lightweight, wasn't he? And even Manny, you always see him in training eating up, and sometimes he'd weigh in with his tracksuit on or his tracksuit pants on. So you could tell he didn't have any problems making the weight. But I think Manny, probably a little bit like Floyd Mayweather in the end, was just fought at welterweight just as a convenient weight that both could have fought lower, where obviously Marquez was just obviously chasing the dollars.
Yeah, I mean, and to that note with Manny, because I spent quite a few weeks in camp with him
tell us about
preparing for Brandon Rios. Yeah. And he was eating over a pound of rice twice a day. And his weight was fluctuating from 139 pounds to 141. So you got to think, he's welterweight champion of the world, 147. And in camp, got to think, in camp, he's over a complete weight class beneath that weight. It's incredible what both these guys achieved, given how unnaturally they were fighting in weight, how small they were naturally at this weight.
And you can tell, I mean, you jump from that second fight to this third fight, and you can tell that obviously, like you said, they're a lot bulkier. The pace is probably not as frenetic as the other two fights. But again, as I said, Manny's style has not changed in it. But I think Juan Manuel Marquez, this looks like he wasn't prepared to... He's probably more inclined to fight smarter rather than faster, if that makes sense, because he just, as I said at the start, I just think this was the fight where he fought his best.
Yeah, I think he actually adjusted his guard a bit. His guard's a lot tighter. He has more 1, 2, 3 shots, and then you see back to position.
Yep.
Whereas in the previous two bouts, he might have gone chasing Pacquiao a little bit. I think, like you said, it played out to a lot of the discipline, and much of that has to go down to the strategies that Nacho Beristain prepared him to implement.
Oh, he was a master, wasn't he, Nacho Beristain? So this is round 10. So we'll go over the scores as we're going here. So the final result is at the start for the WBO welterweight title. The end result was Pacquiao 115, 113, 116, 112. So again for Pacquiao, 114, 114 for Marquez. But as I said, this was probably the more, I suppose, dominant on the scorecards for Manny, but this is probably the fight I actually thought, watching it at the time, that Marquez might have done enough to win. I mean, like all the other, like the first two as well, you toss a coin and no matter how you looked at it, you could probably make a case for both of them. But I must admit, I just thought Marquez did enough to win this fight, but sounds how wrong I was, because one of the judges had it 8 rounds to 4. How did you have it?
I was confident Marquez won at the conclusion. I thought 8-4.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people around me too were relatively confident Marquez had controlled it too. So look, it's never a surprise when you got fights and fighters of this magnitude. If you're not winning rounds definitively, sometimes the judges shade to the guy who's a bigger box office attraction. And I know that, like I said, going into this bout, Marquez felt haunted by the fact he hadn't defeated Pacquiao yet. So you can only imagine the frustration that was overcome in his mind with this result.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as I said, Pacquiao got the majority decision. One of the judges had it a draw. Now, as I said, probably maybe worst case might have had it a draw, but either that or I thought Marquez won. But anyway, it was really good of Manny to actually give Marquez the fourth fight, because you could probably tell by that in his mind he needed a little bit of closure as well, because technically he was 2-1 or two wins and one draw.
2-0-1.
Yeah, in the series. So, and obviously by the way he went out which is this one, fight number 4, he wanted to get that knockout where Marquez wanted to finally have that closure on his own career to beat Manny, and we'll get the fight started there. A little bit of insight into this one is I was actually at this fight in Vegas. I actually took my 2 sons to the first fight. We're over there on holidays, and I think my sons were 6 and 4. So probably not the best place to take him in a place full of beer drinking fight fans, but they loved it. But I just remember how quick Pacquiao started. You can even see the pace here compared to the third fight. Seems a lot quicker, but I think maybe both of them maybe carried the weight a little bit better, but I can just remember Pacquiao starting really, really quick. Marquez nice and composed as he normally is. But as you'll see soon, it was to his detriment that Pacquiao started so quickly.
Yeah, I think all fireworks kind of exploded in this bout. This bout was more to the pace of their first 2 fights, but obviously measured given a little bit of age and slowing down somewhat, and also the experience of both fighters. But to your point as well before, I think Pacquiao finally found the weight that he settled best at in between fights and in camp. And Marquez had actually brought on Angel Memo Heredia into camp for this bout, where Heredia is extremely well known in terms of weights and nutrition, dietary programs. So that's why you see adjustments in his body too, where he's carrying a lot more leaner muscle.
Yeah, well, he only weighed 143 again, but he does look like he carries the weight a lot better in this fight. Manny actually weighed 147 for this fight, which is strange. I mean, he doesn't look any different, but maybe because was he still with? And you see the knockdown there, and that's obviously the strength training that you were talking about there. Because I remember on the night when he hit him, the arena, the roof nearly lifted off the arena when he hit him with that shot. It was a beautiful shot. You'd almost hear him hitting the floor actually. So, but to his credit, he got up and. Yeah, it was. So what? How many knockdowns was that in the series? I know, was it 5-2? I think, was it, or am I right? Marquez was down 5 times, 6 times.
Yeah, so 3, times. 4. Yeah, it would have been 5 in the end. Yeah.
And Manny obviously 2. But one thing that I remember seeing in training camp, or was actually shown after the fight here, Mike, you can obviously see the knockdown here again, where it was just a beautiful overhand right over the top of Pacquiao's guard. But that punch that he was practicing in sparring, in training camp, was that timing the left and coming through, was it timing the right, coming through with that right hand inside? And obviously, as we'll soon see, that was the difference.
Well, Pacquiao always had that habit on the right side, especially when he jab, and look to load up there, right there.
Yep.
Always had that habit of squaring up. And when he was a bit younger and fresher, he could get away with those habits. But you know yourself, as you get older as an athlete, just a little bit of that speed and timing slows down where you can be timed yourself.
Yeah, and I think also in this fight as well is that, Manny was obviously really looking for that knockout. You could tell that, but more so than that, you can see, I think this is the 5th round coming up, I think. Yeah, number 5. You can see that Manny obviously gets the knockdown back here. And I just get a feeling that also might have played into the end result as well, because after that, we always say he's reckless. We were saying that before, but he got even more reckless. I mean, I think he thought he almost had Marquez done, because you'll even see in the next round, Marquez was bloodied. He was taking a lot of shots. I think Pacquiao thought he might have been on the verge of maybe stopping Marquez, and he just poured it on. But as history will show, Marquez had one good punch left in him.
it's hard to dial back guys that are so offensive minded. The interesting part is Pacquiao actually did make some adjustments after this bout. So maybe he needed an outcome of this nature to go on and beat the likes of Timmy Bradley twice, strategically how he did, and preserve his career and have the longevity he did. But at this point, he was all-out attack. And you see here just recklessly pressing forward. And there's always a chance with great counterpunchers like Marquez that you might walk onto a killer shot.
You can just see there's absolutely no regard for defence at all, is there? He's not even attempting to put his hands up after he punches. He's just one attack after the other. And as I said, you can see there, look at Marquez's face there. And I just get the impression there that Manny thought, this is my chance. This is my chance to actually get Marquez out of there. And I remember on the night in the crowd, even amongst so many Mexicans there, they all thought Marquez was done as well. He was really starting to fade. You can see here that Manny's landing shots at will. Marquez is trying to fight back, but you can see there that Manny was landing shots at will. He was really starting to pick up the pace, and as we'll show in a minute or in a couple of seconds there, that it was just a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, this is.
You can see here,
and you look here. This is a nothing assault. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just trying to press just for the sake of pressing. There was nothing Pacquiao could land there with 2 seconds left in the round, except walking onto that shot. But you can't change guys' temperaments. It was a frightening knockout. I can only imagine what it would have been like to be in that building on that night.
It was absolutely crazy. All I can remember at the time is that beer cups and hats and whatever went flying up in the air. We got absolutely showered in beer, myself and a friend I was with, and our kids were all just saturated in beer. But just the atmosphere, it was probably the most noise I've ever heard at a fight. It was just so electric, and because there's obviously so many Mexicans there. It was the Mexican long weekend, of course. I think it wasn't Cinco de Mayo. No, actually it wasn't. It was December. So, but either way, it was probably 90% Mexicans. It was just out of control, and the way they reacted. And I just thought at the time, the first thought that actually went through my head was, well, there goes the Mayweather fight. I thought that would never happen after that. I thought that's it, because the way he got knocked out, I thought that was almost career over for Manny. That's how bad the knockout was. I mean, he was out for probably 2 or 3 minutes cold. So I thought that was it. But the other thing I must admit on the night, and I was barracking hard for Pacquiao, was good on Marquez. Good on him. He been through those 3 fights in the past, and this was a little bit of retribution from his part.
He finally had his moment of glory that cemented his legacy as a professional fighter. And to me, it's still a shame we didn't see a 5th bout, because it would have been a massive payday for both. Obviously, a career-high payday for Marquez. Rather than coming out of this bout, he rolled straight into a contest with Tim Bradley, and he was outboxed over 12 rounds.
Yep.
I just thought that the interest in the Pacquiao fight was sky high, and Pacquiao never needed to grant him a rematch, even after the first bout. Pacquiao was a little bit more firmly cemented with where his position was at. He was the pay-per-view attraction, and I felt like Marquez almost, in a sense, owed Manny a 5th contest, but he finally got that one back, and even though the series was 2-1-1, he's the only one to leave the other guy on the canvas, so I think he just rode off into the sunset on that achievement. But when you weigh up their careers overall, I just think it's a shame that we didn't see the 5th bout.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. And unlike the Vasquez-Marquez 4 fights, or the series of fights they had, there wasn't really a need for the 5th fight there. But in this one, I think I agree, it would have just been massive. And I think from Marquez's point of view, though, I think he just thought, you know what, I'm not gonna play with destiny or my legacy or whatever. I've got the knockout win, and what a knockout win it was. There's no way he was ever gonna repeat that. You wouldn't have thought. So I don't blame him for saying, you know what, I've got the upper hand. Now Pacquiao sucked that pretty much, I think, because they had that rivalry, and I think Manny, he would have fought him no problems. But I don't blame Marquez for not fighting him, although obviously as a fan, we would have liked to have seen it. So that was, so at the time, Pacquiao was actually in front 47-46 on all 3 scorecards. Not that obviously that meant anything in the end result, but just what a definitive way for Marquez to pretty much get one up on Manny Pacquiao. Of course, Manny would go on to some bigger and better things after that. I mean, Marquez lost the next fight with Timothy Bradley and then had the win over Mike Alvarado and retired. Manny had lots of fights. I won't go through all of them, but still he had some mega fights, of course, with Mayweather. The fights with Timothy Bradley, throw in the Jeff Horn fight, of course, and Keith Thurman. So just he went on to have a great career, or both of these guys, just legendary careers, and what a series.
Yeah, and the interesting part on Pacquiao as well, like I said, I was there present in the Brandon Rios camp. So that was his comeback fight coming off this fight with Marquez. Yep. And I had a lot of media call me the first week. Second week I was there, concerned about Pacquiao, how he was going to return off the knockout loss. Was he going to be gun shy? How was he going to react? And I said to him, I go, you have nothing to be worried about. First week of sparring, he knocked out 3 of the sparring partners.
Is that right? Yeah.
And Pacquiao wasn't that type of guy to go out and hunt for knockouts. It was just organically happening where he was walking them onto all right hooks, surprisingly so, but knocked them all out with right hooks. And just thinking, the king is back.
Well, that fight with Rios, what was it? Pretty much a year later. Was it in Malaysia?
Yeah,
I think
November.
it was, wasn't it? Macau.
Macau.
Yeah, Macau. Yeah. I'm with you. I mean, I think in hindsight, Rios was the absolute perfect opponent for him, wasn't it? Because all he did was just walk up with his hands up. He's almost a walking punching bag, and with Manny's speed, he never stood a hope. But he did look super impressive in that fight, and of course, then he fought Bradley after that and won the rematch, and went on to many others after that. So, mate, so that's about it for this episode. That was Manny Pacquiao, Juan Manuel Marquez. I'm not sure what you call that. I know there's obviously a trilogy. What do you call 4 fights? We'll just call it a series.
Quadrilogy.
Quadrilogy. There you go. Well said. The quadrilogy between Pacquiao and Marquez. So, mate, so I'm glad we've got you for a little while yet. We'll see you next Tuesday for the next classic fight. And, mate, as always, great to have your input into what was an unbelievable series.
No, thank you for having me on.
Thanks, mate.